Hello everyone. I would like to welcome you all for today's webinar, which is Strategic Implementation of Data Governance within a Company. I'm your presenter for today. My name is Bharat Tambat and I specialize in data governance implementation, SAP Master Data Governance and Consolidation implementation topics. If you have any questions during the course of your presentation, then you can type it in the message box and I will answer it at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. So let's look into the agenda. First, we will see what is data governance. What are the goals of data governance? What is data governance framework? Our company's approach for data governance. We will look at the data governance project structure and then we will see an example scenario for the data governance. So let's begin now. What is data governance? Data governance is a system for defining who within an organization has authority and control over data assets and how these data assets may be used. It encompasses people, processes, technologies required to manage and protect data assets. Data governance defines processes, defines decision rights, and accountabilities for your data assets. Your data assets can be anything like, for example, material master or business partner data. So using data governance, you can define how your data material master process will look like. Who will be part of your material master process? Who will be responsible or accountable for the data which is maintained in the material master? Who will be responsible for the fields? All this you can define using data governance. So let's look into what are the goals of data governance. Here is what you can achieve by data governance. You achieve better, more comprehensive decision support across data. You have defined clear rules for changing processes and data that help business and IT become more agile and scalable. So once you set your data process, it does help to reduce the cost in other data management through provision of central control mechanism. You can define your data governance process centrally. You can manage it centrally. It increases efficiency through reliability, through the ability to reuse processes and data. So once you set the data quality rules, once you set the metrics, it improves confidence in the data quality and the documentation of the processes. Once your data is clear, once the data quality is established, it improves compliance with the data regulation. And last but not the least, data governance acts as a solid base for SAP Master Data Governance implementation project. Once you set your process, you can use those processes in your master data governance project. So here is an general overview for the data governance. So for any organization to be fruitful, it needs transparent, automated process. It needs single point of truth for master data. It needs correct, reliable data. Overall company standard should be maintained. And to have a fruitful tree, what you need are the strong roots. And using data governance, you can strengthen the roots. You can have clear defined responsibilities. You have clear defined data ownership. You have focus on security. You establish data stewards, which looks after the data. You define and maintain well-documented processes. All this achieved helps us to strengthen the roots. Now let's deep dive into the data governance. So here is the data governance framework. So these are what you see in this slide are the pillars for your data governance. So the data governance organization, you define what is your data governance organization structure. What is the position of your master data management in the organization? You define what are the processes are included in the data governance. You have defined roles, you define role concept, what roles will be part of your data governance project. You define responsibilities, responsibility matrix. You define various tools which will be used in the project. You define tasks, standards, business support, data quality, and then you define the data maintenance. And in the maintenance process, you define the rollout process, you define change management process, documentation, and so on. In the subsequent slides, we will see in detail about each and every pillar. So let's look into what is data governance organization. Data governance organization is responsible for setting up data governance program. It is responsible for measuring success and gathering metrics. Data governance organization creates a roadmap for the data governance project. It defines communication and change management strategy. It defines metrics and regularly assesses your work against those metrics. So the data governance organization is responsible for the overall data governance project. Processes and tasks. So what processes will be part of your data governance are defined. So you can define processes for material master data or business partner data or finance processes. You can have all those processes, or even you can have an individual process selected as a part of your data governance project. You have to list the business flows, what are the business cases, what are the business support which will be part of your data governance. You define the task list, you define standards, data quality rules. So let's take a look for a sample task list which we have prepared. So as you can see in this Excel, you can see the various task lists which is prepared. There are tasks at different levels. At the strategy level, you set data governance vision, you set data governance strategy, you set data governance organization. What is the mandate for the data governance organization? You define roles and responsibilities. In the standards, you define the standards, you define policies, you define escalation process. You have various guidelines, nomenclature, authorization management. You define various tasks like to be processed. You define tools. You define the field ownership, how it will impact your material master process. For example, you define compliance. You define mergers and acquisition process, reporting process. You define the training, how the IT support looks like. You establish a key metrics, you establish data quality measures, you define the cleansing projects. So these are the various tasks you can define in the task list. So now we will look into the roles and responsibilities. Roles are essential for every data governance project. Clear defined responsibilities is the main goal of any data governance project. We can have various roles in the project, data governance project, like data owner, data stewards, requester. All these roles we have to map in the responsibility matrix. We can use tools like RACI or ARPA to map those responsibility matrix. Let's look into a responsibility matrix. Here is a sample RACI matrix which is used to map those responsibilities. At the left, you can see all the tasks which you have prepared in the task list, and on the right, you can see the various roles which are used in this project. So for example, we have role for data governance steering committee, we have role for data governance council, we have role for data stewards, IT, as well as legal. So for example, when we have a task for data governance vision or to set the data governance strategy, we have this data governance council as an responsible, and data governance steering committee is accountable. When we have to establish structures or policies or define an escalation processes, then data governance council is consulted. To define various tools, data governance council is informed and IT is responsible for it. To be process. To define the to be process, data stewards are responsible, and then data governance council is accountable and steering committee is informed. So for compliance, legal team is consulted. For training, data stewards are responsible and data governance council is consulted. For IT support, IT team is responsible for it and data stewards are consulted. So this is an example of how you can map various tasks with the various roles you have. So now we will see into the roles concept. Different roles have different responsibilities in the data governance organization. We have different roles at different level. For example, strategy level, planning, operational level. At operational level, we have requesters who request the data, who creates your data, or who updates the data. Then we have data stewards. Data stewards then looks after the data. They are responsible for the data which is maintained. Then in the planning level, we have data owners who are accountable for their own data domain. So once we have a bigger set of data, for example, material master, in material master, we have various fields. So then you can divide those fields or you can combine those fields in various domains or various departments like sales team, production team, manufacturing department, sales team. So you can have a data owner for each team. And all those data owner forms a data governance council. Data governance council then monitors the data governance processes. It monitors the data, how you maintain the data. It monitors how the process is there, and then they can decide upon or they can update the processes. And data governance steering committee is responsible for the successful execution of the project. It monitors and advises the data governance council. Now here is a data governance approach we at IBsolution follows. We at IBsolution help at each level of your data governance project. Data governance strategy, we can support on formulation of data governance strategy, creation of a data governance roadmap for data governance framework, help in formulation of processes, task, define the RACI metrics, define the final framework based on the customer needs or standards. Data governance organization, define an organization concept, define operating model, implementation of the organization, like who will be involved, who are the persons responsible, ownership mapping, mapping the template, creation of task, creation or preparation of data dictionary. So in data dictionary, you can define your data, how this data is called, define maintenance process, visualize maintenance process, like create process, change process, or any other process which you set. Define the working model for the process, define process documentation and the training. And then we install the data governance organization. We define the rollout mechanism to roll out the data governance across organization. We define documentation as well as the change management standards. So you define the change management process. If there is any change in a process, it should be communicated across the organization so that everybody is aware of the change. So in the change management process, you define that. So let's look into how the project timeline for the data governance project looks like. We have organization, we have processes. So we define the data governance organization. We define what is the as-is process, what are the processes which will be the part of data governance. We study the best practices. We study the needs of the customer, and then we design the to-be process. So once the to-be process is done, we define the roles, we define tasks. What are the roles? Who will be part of data governance? What are the responsibilities? What are the tasks? We define in the RACI template. All these things are mapped. Implementation. Data governance implementation is done. Then we deep dive into the field assignments. So from the task level, from the roles level, we come to the field assignment. So all the respective fields of your master data is mapped. Who is responsible for maintaining that particular field is mapped. We do the roles assignment. We define the operating model, and then comes the maintenance part. Here the change management process is set. The rollout across organization is defined. All the documentation, process documentation, change management process documentation, everything is done. So this is how the project timeline looks like. Now here is an example scenario how the data governance helps in any organization. So let's have an example for in material master field. So we have for example, a field called NetWet. Here we have different departments like sales department, production department, warehouse department. They all say that NetWet is important for them and they should be the one responsible. But as an end user, it is not clear for which department he has to approach if there are any issues in maintaining those weight. Each and every department says that he is responsible, he should be informed, he should be aware of the field. There is no clear defined rule for that field. There is no clear defined process for maintenance of that field. So at the request, this leads to sometimes inconsistent data. It leads to error, and then it increases the time for the maintenance process. Once the data governance process is implemented, then there is a clear defined ownership for a field. There is one department or person is responsible for that field. So it is easier for a requester, for an end user to approach that particular person in case of any issues. So then it clearly defines the single point of truth for the data. So this is how the data governance is implemented. So this is how the data governance looks like, and this is how the data governance helps in maintaining your helps in maintaining the data. And using data governance, it also helps in implementation process of SAP Master Data Governance. So using data governance project, once you have defined rules, responsibilities, all this you can carry forward for your SAP Master Data Governance implementation project. All this you can use in the MDG process. So whatever the process you set, for example, material creation process, material change process, how is the process flow? So this you can clearly carry forward in the SAP Master Data Governance. So what roles you define in the data governance, who will be responsible for those data. This responsibility matrix is then taken forward to the master data governance project. We have defined the field mapping. So this field mapping is then used in designing the user interface. So overall, this data governance project acts as a solid base for your SAP master data governance project. So now, as we have seen, this is how the data governance project structure looks like. So I hope what the data governance is clear. Data governance project, how the data governance is implemented across the organization is clear for you. So this is all from my side right now, and we will look into the questions. So if you have any questions, please type it in the message box, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. So we have a question. So we have first question. For which organization or is data governance applicable for a smaller company? Yes, data governance is applicable. Basically, irrespective of the size of the organization, data governance is helpful. So as data governance, the goal of data governance is to have consistent process, is to have defined roles and responsibilities. So thus, the data governance is helpful across various organizations, whether it is a small or whether it is a big organization. Do we have any further questions? Okay, there is a question coming up. How is the roles mapping is done. Okay. So for example, we define various roles like data stewards. So basically, data stewards are responsible for maintaining the data. They are responsible for their looking after the data. So whatever the requester enters the data, then data stewards can check the data. And then this is how these roles are mapped. So in your organization, we can set the process. So requester, they request for the data, then data stewards, they can look after the data. They can see if the data is correct or not, and you can set the roles like this. Then we can establish various roles. If your organization have a central level, if your organization is spread across different regions, then we can have different roles. At the local level, we can have roles at the global level. So both global as well as the local person is aware of what data is being entered in the system. So then this is how then we can achieve the correct data. Any other question? Hmm. What should a data dictionary contain, and what tools you recommend for it? Okay. The data dictionary can contain, so the content of your data dictionary you can define like in your data governance process, if there is any change in terminologies, like for example, if this field was mentioned as a net weight, and if there is another tool implemented and there it defines that this field is called as other field, so this is how you maintain the data dictionary. So you can have those what are the old description, you can have the new description in your data dictionary. And the tools, so you can use tools, for example Excel, or if there is any other tool available in the market, then we can use for it. Do we have any question, further questions? Okay, so how does data governance helps for master data governance project? Yeah, as we have seen earlier, this once using data governance project, we define process. Let's take again an example of material master data. So we define a process, how the material creation process will look like, what will be the role, approval process in it. So this is all defined in the process. So then the same process you can map in SAP MDG. And once you have this field ownership, so which field is maintained by which department, this again you can carry forward in SAP MDG. You can set the UI behavior like that. So you can maintain the field properties. So once we come to the field assignment, in that it is defined that this field is mandatory, this field is optional, this field should contain only this particular data. So you can define these rules, and these rules you can implement using SAP Master Data Governance. We have further question. What is input about the data governance over cloud? How does roles and process from on-premise, I think if I'm reading it correctly, it means how the process differ from on-premise data. I hope I have read it correctly. Yeah. So basically, data governance, it is not related to any technology, I would say. Data governance is related for the process. So this is just the process we are talking about, material master process. So it is not exactly related to where it is maintained, whether it is maintained on cloud, whether it is maintained locally in any system. So you define your process using data governance. You define the roles. Again, these roles are also independent of the technology. Once you define roles in your data governance, you can then carry forward those roles in the technology which you have implemented. For example, here I'm talking about SAP Master Data Governance. So what the roles you define, you can carry forward in SAP MDG like that. How does the role and process differ from on-premise data? Again, this is same related to the process and how it is from whether it is on-premise or whether it is on the cloud. I hope I have answered your questions correctly. Do we have any further questions? If you have again further questions, again after the checking of webinar, you can email us and then we will be happy to answer your questions or whatever your doubts you have for your data governance, how to set up, how we can integrate data governance in your current processes. All those we will be happy to answer your questions. Okay, so thank you from my side. So thank you for attending the webinar and I hope it is clear. Thank you.